the first thing that we get inside of lighting, the first thing that we're doing is we're establishing light direction with shading. Okay, so if you start out and you have a shape like this, I make a decision that the light is coming from this side. Okay, and then this entire half of the piece drops into shadow. So and this introduces some real graphic power. I would like to ask you for a while to be really clean about what's light and what's shade. Okay? So like instead of having drawings where light and shade are happening all over the place, like what I'd really like to ask you to do is I'd really like for you to, at the beginning of your sketches, I'd like for you to separate, say like this is the light side, this is the shadow side. It makes for effective designing in the early stages of a drawing. And you don't even have to go about filling it all in right away. Okay. The next thing that we get inside of the next thing is cast shadow. Okay. And so based on the light direction, the other side of the light is a shadow. And shadows can do really, really interesting things. So a very basic diagram starts having all kinds of dimension, it starts having form, it starts being not just being related to proportion and gesture, but also being related to life. And that's kind of awesome because we have we have this tremendous history of cinematography. So it starts being related to what we see in movies and in stories and stuff like that. So the cast shadow becomes different. Like, so let's say if we have a wall and we have a really little guy in front of the wall. And if this really little guy standing in front of this wall, if there's a car that's right here, and because the headlights of that car are super close to this guy, he's going to throw this giant shadow. It's going to go like this. So the shape of his shadow becomes a cross contour. And a cross contour is this. Here's a sphere. That's a cross contour. And it's a trick for showing volume. And so one of the problems with the using of the cross contour is it's a tiny bit obvious or a little overt. However, if you use a cast shadow to show a shape, it's kind of slick, right? Other great cross contours, can you think of like other amazing cross contours? Like your collar, a person's collar, a person's hat, a person's glasses, the way that they wrap around your face, the top of a person's shoe. Okay, let's say that this guy here, let's say that this is grass. Now you would see like these little details in the shadow. The shadow would be like illuminating, would be showing you the texture of the surface that it's falling on. It's very simple force, right? Like you can gain access to this it's very simple for you to get your images a lot more graphic, a lot faster. Here's another thing that happens. Let's say we have this guy. Okay. If the light is coming from over here, see how the light, as I go into the distance, see how it becomes less pervasive, how it becomes like less contrasty? So we have this thing going on. What's going on is you can imagine like these glass plates, almost like, actually think about it like this. Imagine that those guys were on the bottom of the ocean. And if you're on the bottom of the ocean and you're looking from the one who's like 10 feet from you, and the last one who's about 50 feet from you, there's all this water between you and the last one, and you're like looking through that water. And as you're looking through that water, things become less clear. So looking through air is very similar to looking through water. Air is a lot easier to see through, right? But like, so you get, this is called atmospheric perspective. And you gain access to it just by lightening what goes back. Okay, and like making what goes into the distance less contrasting. So it's not just lightening it. Sometimes you might, if you're dealing with highlights, they'll lessen as the thing goes into the distance. If you're dealing with texture, it lessens as the thing goes into the distance. If you're dealing with line weight, it lessens as the thing goes into the distance. Okay, so if we were like gonna show a heavy line, if I take this line and I just lighten it as it goes into the distance, I'm reinforcing a concept of distance. And by doing that, my work takes on, it gains a sort of, it gains a bigness. Okay, it gains a sort of conceptual richness. Okay, another move that we want to use is we want to do this. When we have something, say I have this guy here. You want to use spaces of dark and spaces of light to make the point of the drawing. So I'm just using tone to bring this character out, right? Like if I took this guy here, if the point of this particular sketch was this guy, if I put this guy in front of a door like this and darken, see how that guy becomes the sort of the one? So we use spaces of flat black, okay? So our shading, we don't just use shading to describe form. We use shading as a design element to tell a story. Now in this instance, I made an open doorway so I can contrive a reason to have a darkness, to have a big dark mass, right? Like I could say over here, I could say that this guy would also be casting a shadow, and I could use that as a reason to have like a big space of blackness, or I could say this doesn't have any light on it, and I could use that as a reason to have a big space of blackness. There's a beautiful movie about the history of cinematography, and they called it, the name of it was called Sculpting in Light. And so it's like, that's kind of what we're doing. We're like sculpting volume, form, story out of, and we're just using light, middle, dark, okay? Like so far, we're just using light, middle, dark. Okay. Another place where we're going to start to use value is in describing the local is in describing local values, right? So for instance, so we have the puppy, and there's like a black section, and there's a white section. So you have like the gangster, but they're standing like in total light, but they're wearing a black suit. Even though they're standing in the midst of like even like a spotlight. So we have local value, we have cast shadow, we have flat value, right? Like just this is just flat value being used to describe something, being used to portray something. Okay. So now, after all of those pieces, now we'll start to talk a little bit about rendering. Okay. So rendering involves this. You start out with a piece of form. And we assign a light direction. Like if we say, let's say that the light direction is like coming from this way, okay? Because the light direction is coming from that way, this is going to be in shadow. Did I lose it? This is going to be moving into, so then I have, this is in light, right here is in shadow. Shadow has a theory of planes that goes with it. So the plane that's catching the light most directly is the most lit. As the objects turn away from the light in planes, they get dimmer, okay? Because the transitions from light to dark here, because there are these really smooth transitions, like on a circle, it goes like this, like these are like these gentle transitions. See, I'm turning away from the light here. The light is right there. I'm turning away from the light right here. I might need to, here I might need to get, okay. So if the form looked like this, then it would be shaded like this. So we have this light direction coming and hitting here, the areas that face the light mostly, but here in the one where everything is like folded paper, it doesn't have gentle transitions, it doesn't have gradations. It's only when you have soft forms and light that's soft enough to show gradations. Like you can take away gradations. Like you guys have seen film noir where it's all basically just like black and white, like there's no middle tone. We're using a specific kind of lighting, so it cuts the form. Okay, so then you have there's a moment right here. So let's say that there's a cast shadow going this way, the light's coming from that way. There's a moment right here where the form hits the ground, and tucked deep into that space is a place where light doesn't get to. That's called occlusion. There's a little spot in there, and it's a shadow accent, and it's just sitting right in there, okay? I'm going to divide this into light and shadow. There's a section right here where the shadow is darkest. That's called the core shadow or terminator. And now, as we turn out of the shadow, we're going to turn through, because this shape is round, right? It doesn't work like that on squared shapes, but because this shape is round, what we're going to do is we're going to gently turn out of the shadow. It's almost indecipherable. And we're going to turn through a halftone. Into the light. That's very traditional rendering. I was reading this morning some advice to cartoonists from, it was called, there's this thing, if you find these documents, they're pretty cool. It was called like Famous Artist School. They had Norman Rockwell and all these other amazing illustrators to write articles about drawing and painting and how to tell stories with illustration. And there's this whole passage about shading, and they're talking about, they're like, there's an art director, and he's like, the surest way to tell an amateur is overshading. It's like a million scratchy little lines, just like everywhere. Instead of like a decided, designed, dark, light, volume, form, best, most effective storytelling. Instead of that, it's like a billion little lines, like, climbing all over everything and like scratching up the surface of everything and making everything look kind of hairy and blurry. And it's like the antithesis of like concise, clear, pointed, focused, determined, designed shading. So that's I'm not that interested in that. This here, so there is reason to study surface quality. Okay, so for instance, if this is steel, if it's aluminum, the reflected light, you see this is a reflected light, the reflected light will be like more intense. It'll be stronger. It'll just like catch reflections. If this was aluminum and this was in this situation, like there would be a reflection of this guy in it. But if it's a matte surface, it wouldn't have that. So like the reflections in objects, the surface qualities of objects, those are all really interesting and useful. Like you should study objects. Like when you go out and you're like looking at, so for instance, my shirt is not reflective, right? But we could find something and you're like, this surface is really kind of nice and reflective. It's catching this huge highlight. The way that highlights work is highlights follow you. Like if you look at this object and you can find a highlight on it, if you move your head slightly, you'll notice the highlight moving. What's going on is the highlight is like a bank shot. The highlight is like it's related to where you are. It's halfway between where you and the light are. Okay? So if you move around to the dark side of an object, like that's how you get this light, where when you have, say you have this guy, but there's like, if he's lit from behind, like that, what's going on is the highlight is say he's lit from behind, halfway between you and the light is the edge of him. And the edge of him becomes illuminated, and it's a rim light. It's a very beautiful light. It's very dramatic and effective and widely used. It's very cool. Okay, I have two more things I wanted to tell you about light. One of them is this quality. Say we have that was here. Say we have a street light like this. Light has what we'll call falloff. Okay, so as if this is a light coming out this way, as it gets further from the light source, it starts to dim. And so like right here, it will all be brighter, but then as it goes away, it just starts to dim, okay? It has this quality. When you're drawing something, I sketched this morning to tell you this here, okay? Be clean about what's in light and what's in shadow. Like, don't mess up your lights with a lot of shadows, and don't mess up your shadows with a lot of lights. Keep it a really clean shape. And if you look at this shape that I'm getting here, the shape of the shadow becomes like incredibly cool, right? Like the shape of the shadow it's almost like it would be worth doing this drawing for the shape of the shadow. So let yourself like get excited about shadow shapes. There's a guy who has, I don't remember his name, but he's got all these videos about how to render. You look this dude up and he's got like a class you can take. I took it through Proco. It's only like $25. And the guy is a render lunatic. He really renders everything. He draws monsters in graphite, and he does a great job. And the first thing that he does is he gets his shadow shapes, and then he flattens them with a stump, and then he starts turning out of them. And that's like his process. He just like gets a beautiful shadow shape, and then goes in, flattens it, and then he takes a harder pencil and he starts turning out of it, however far he wants to based on the performance. And it's like, you know, it's effective. It's not my exact style. Like I definitely prefer something that's more graphic. Everything that he does is really, really super roundy. And so it's like, you know, people are really impressed by that. Like if they're going through your notebooks, like go through your notebook and you'll have, you know, maybe some of your best work in your life or something like that. And, you know, next to like you sat down and really drew the hell out of the work, rendered everything, you know, somebody will be like, wow, that's amazing. And you're like, what about the King Kong next to it with a great shadow on the wall? That's cool too. Anyway, so that's it, guys. So what I want you to do is I want you to practice what we did last class, right? Last class we did all form. Then we did form based on horizon. We did all the geometric solids, and we based. So this drawing could now be subject to light design, could now be subject to value design. Okay, so that's the direction that I'd like for you to be practicing in. Like right now, I want you to like jump into shapes, designed with light, offset with shadows, rim lights, highlights, occlusion, cast shadows, flat shapes, coming up with contriving reasons to have a flat shape, taking 4 or 5 shapes, trying to make them look great based on light and shadow. All right. My computer gave us 36